Schlanger, and she has a new book called Hippie Woman Wild. Now, I have an interview with her, and she is very interesting. Hippie Woman Wild. You could buy it right here at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, IndieBound. This is our interview.
Hippie Woman Wild, the author.
Yes, that's me, the author.
So how did you become a hippie?
Damned if I know. It was just a natural progression.
How did your parents even allow you?
What do you mean allow me? I took off.
You were old enough, right? What year? How old were you?
23, 22 or 23.
But they were worried. That's still a young age. They're like,
yeah.
What are you doing?
That was very much there. I was a middle-class Jewish girl, and they had great expectations for her. And I was having a career. I went to Yale.
What did Dad and Mom say?
Dad and Mom were really not happy about this at all because, I was the star and they'd invested a lot in me. I was an only child of older parents and they really wanted it.
University?
Yeah, they wanted me to marry a rich something, a stockbroker, an international lawyer, a doctor, maybe not a dentist, a little low. But, and I went off with this guy to live the life I believed in, sort of. I mean, they'd been worried about me for a long time.
Just a normal thing Dad and Mom do.
Yeah, my mother used to say, you were just fine until we dropped you on your head, so.
So your father says, you're going with a dirt poor goy into the wilderness, living with who knows who, doing who knows what, just don't get eaten by a mountain lion. You're breaking our hearts, but we can't stop you.
That's right. That's exactly what he said. He didn't like who I was with, who was a dirt poor goy, which essentially was a guy who had no money from Texas and was not what they wanted for me at all, It's still
they wanted you to marry
Jewish,
yeah.
A lawyer, a doctor, a stockbroker, a judge, whatever, something with a great income that would take care of me in the style to which I had previously been accustomed, or better. He was like Crocodile Dundee. He just did not belong in New York City. He couldn't operate, and he was dyslexic, so he would take the BMT instead of the IRT, and just it was bad. And
that's pretty severe.
Yeah, and not only that, but he didn't like to talk. Now, if you don't like to talk in New York, you really have a problem. And it was just not his kind of town. He was a cowboy, essentially.
Did he have a big knife he carried around?
Later on, he always had a knife. Yeah. But not in New York, he didn't have a knife. But he always collected guns. He essentially was from Nacogdoches, Texas, and was a cowboy.
Like a real cowboy?
But he went to Yale, so he wasn't exactly a real cowboy. That's what we met in Yale in New Haven, and he was an environmental designer, and I was in the drama school, and we met, and there was this flash of lightning, and I was going with a poor man into the woods, not their dream. And I felt bad because, they'd given me everything that they had to give me, and I just threw it away. I had a great apartment in Westbeth, which was a artist cooperative, which was very cheap rent. You could see the river. Goodbye to that. Goodbye to all my furniture. Goodbye to my grandmother's Tiffany lamp. Goodbye to my 15 pairs of shoes or 23 pairs of shoes. Goodbye.
You didn't start crying while you were in the wilderness out in Oregon?
Yeah, I did, especially if I got lost in the woods. I did start crying a lot.
Did you think about it?
Oh, yeah, I certainly did, especially when I got letters from my friends who were on Broadway, were doing great, and I'm thinking, they're becoming the actors that I was an actress that they're supposed to be, and I'm becoming a pagan. What the hell is this? And I took a pair of jeans and a t-shirt and a sweatshirt and a pair of sneakers, and I think I had boots, I don't remember, and a sweater, and I left.
To be a liberated woman, Claudia continued, you have to make choices that are empowering, not to make a man what you want in life, but to want the best for yourself.
Yeah, well, before I left New York, I was in a women's support group, and all these women were very involved in their careers, and they were very smart, and most of them were really successful. And they said, you're leaving to follow some guy into the woods and you're leaving your career behind. What is wrong with you? Why are you doing that? You're following a man. What kind of thing is that to do? That's against all our principles. And I would say, yeah, but I'm in love and I don't want to live without this guy. And that argument was really not acceptable. And I also really wanted to do it for myself. I believed in going back to the land. It was an adventure. I mean, if you've ever seen like Naked and Afraid or any of these things, when you're trying to live and survive, you have to get the wood, have the food, and you have to be warm, and you have to be warm and dry is a big deal. It's all day it takes to be warm and dry in the winter.
Were you guys following some sort of religion? Was there a lot of free sex?
Well, there was freer sex than there ever had been previously. I was not about to experiment too much, but there were a lot of people doing a lot of experimentation. And you did, and it turned out at one point in my life I was relating to two men, and I thought, I can't do this anymore. This is like exhausting. Forget it. And they kept wanting stuff like, get me this, get me that. I didn't like it at all. Tea, can I have it? I don't feel good. Can you It was a pain in the neck. And so I just kind of went back to my original guy, and I'd only really done it because he had done the same thing to me. But it was also his best friend. He wasn't happy about it. I kind of knew who I was. I would always feel sorry for a lot of young girls that would come there, and I felt like they were being used in a certain way. I didn't like it.
So the religious aspect?
There was no religious aspect. It was a back to the land where there was a belief in what was natural, what was simple, what was life-sustaining, those things, maintaining the trees, keeping good soil, growing organically, living without doctors' intervention, trying to do all that stuff by ourselves. And there was all kinds of books and stuff came out about, how to be a backwoods doctor, how to, use herbs and all that kind of thing. I believed in that stuff. My parents had a health food store in New York. That's what I came from. So it was a little bit of a natural transition for me. But it was back to the land. That whole back to the land was saving the planet from our point of view at that time.
From your own experience, would you think that that's kind of where it was spawn, was from the 70s?
Saving the planet?
Sort of
oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, all this. Yeah, and now it's mainstream. I mean, now you see it on television and everything's organic, or it's supposed to be organic, and, and now marijuana is legal. I mean, when I was, it certainly was not legal, and you could get arrested, you could lose your land, you could, but, all the stuff that we believed in, aside from marijuana, which was pretty minimal. I mean, we believed in fresh air and clean water and good soil as a human right.
How did you get on this piece of property? Where did this property come from?
Well,
how did all of a sudden there's all these people, and how did it become a commune?
Oh, okay. Well, when I first landed outside of Eugene, Oregon, I went to this place that had all these people. Primarily, they were a lot of guys from Texas that were an architectural collective, and then a lot of other people. And I lived there for a while, and I enjoyed it to a certain extent. But I really wanted my own place, and like I said, I was a middle-class Jewish girl, and I had saved money from a commercial, and before my parents disowned me, or even after they disowned me, they gave me some money, and I put money down on this piece of property. And so it was my piece of property, and then everybody decided they were renting in this other place, so they decided to come along with me. I didn't invite them. My old man invited them, and so they all came along, and then we had a commune.
How did you get to the post office?
Oh, well, people
How did you guys get anywhere?
People had trucks and cars. I didn't know how to drive. I was from Manhattan,
right.
So I didn't drive, and I expected to be driven, and I was. But, I had to learn how to drive, which was like, oh my God, what an experience that was.
How did the understanding come about that they needed to work on the commune to stay?
Oh, there was no understanding like that. They just naturally did. The work was that you had to stay alive. That was, it wasn't like I was saying, oh, you have to do that, otherwise you can't stay here. I mean, they had to keep warm, they had to keep dry. People were building their houses, and I was I was saying, oh, please stay here, everything is free. And I thought they would bring their own resources, and that was the one that I offered to them. And so that was what I was hoping for. they built little houses for themselves, and there was wood. You know, we only would gather dead wood. We wouldn't gather live wood. We didn't cut down trees at the time. We had no chainsaws anyway. We didn't get them until later. And so, no, there was no quid pro quo.
Exactly. I've been able to drop out into a hippie lifestyle because I'd been born into so much. The people behind those notices hadn't dropped out because they've never been able to drop in.
Yeah, well, those notices are, like I said, are those little 3x5 cards, which you'll find in any kind of deeply rural town where they put them up in the grocery stores. And this was in a laundromat in I think it was in Greenleaf, Oregon, and you know, there's a lot of very poor people there, and that's their life. But you know, I had given everything up to join them in a certain way. I was using the same laundromat they were.
Alpaca Lamos, non-spitting and friendly. Start your own business with magic weight loss worm from Mexico. Results guaranteed.
Okay, so that was on a little 3x5 card in the laundromat, and it was people like traded. Somebody had an alpaca llama that they were selling, and it was non-spitting, and it was friendly. So that's a nice llama. That's a good llama if you want a llama. And then the magic weight loss worm, I came to think it was a tapeworm. So somebody was selling tapeworms as their new business, and I was thinking about buying one because I had a weight problem, but then I remembered somebody had pulled a 20-foot tapeworm out of this woman's butt, and
Andy, how would you cultivate tapeworm?
I don't know. Look, I would have done anything at that, you know, but no, I didn't, and I realized that this person, that was their business, was selling tapeworms.
Louise turned away from me to face the others. Her voice was filled with rancor. Carol, she said, we're not the proletariat, and you are not the ruling class. How'd that come about?
Well, it came about because I told somebody what to do, because the truth was, the second place we moved to, I owned the property, and these people were building something that I didn't want them to build. It just wasn't appropriate, and I told them not to do it, and then I broke the golden rule, which is you don't tell people what to do, but I owned it was really my place, and then I realized, like, oh no, I'm the head that's wearing the crown, because I didn't think so before. I just thought, oh, it's like if you have a dinner party, you invite everybody to dinner and enjoy yourself and have a good time, and but don't take home the plates.
So that could be an argument. Well, there's no rules. I can say
there's no rules. But the only rule is there's no rules, but there's no rules. We were all equal. No one could tell another person what to do. That was the cardinal rule.
So the range of time that the commune existed was what? Like, what was the years?
Well, there were a couple of communes in the book, but the main one was about 3 years. It goes from about 1971 to 1974. So many communes, especially in Oregon and in Northern California, because it had been this like kind of, the Vikings kind of drifted out. It's called an archaeological drift, where people go. So they all kind of started coming up, and there were lots of different communes, and they all had a different focus and different belief system. From the commune I wound up on, it was at least 6 miles, and then you could only use a phone booth. I didn't know the ranchers, I didn't know to ask them to use their phones, so there was a phone booth about 6 miles away, coin operated, where
Sure.
Do you remember those?
I remember those.
Yeah, okay.
I'm
So,
old
you put money in the thing. But no, I didn't speak. I wrote letters, how wonderful my life was, and my mother would send me stuff like tuna fish cans and hangers.
Tending the fire was like surfing or sailing, adjusting to the forces of nature to ride the wind and the waves. A hell of a way to bake banana bread.
Well, there are two ways, there's the fire to keep you warm, and then we had a big cook stove, like a big cook stove, and then like has a little firebox in it, so you can't cook unless you keep the fire going, so you have to learn how to keep the fire going, and you have to have kindling, and then you have the little sticks, and you have to know where to put the kindling on top of the little sticks, and then in the wood stove that keeps you warm, you have to know what kind of wood to get. You can't have wet wood, of course, but like fir burns longer than cedar. Cedar you use to start fires. And then you have to keep tending the fire just to make sure that it doesn't go out and that it doesn't go too high. So it's really, it's something that, you know, you don't turn on the gas, you don't turn on the electricity, you just have to watch how this thing goes if you're cooking and or doing anything that requires heat.
Were you the one who was cooking?
I cooked a lot, and it tended to break down a little bit along sexual lines because the women knew how to cook and the men were essentially stronger than we were. It was before Jane Fonda's workout. I read Freud and got annoyed. Raising penis envy, the whole thing he did with women, I mean, it was completely nutso as far as I was concerned. When I heard first his theories,
That sounds like a man saying it.
I'm sure he had good points, but he annoyed me.
So the industry was logging up here mostly?
Yeah, the industry was logging. That particular person, the eye molesting guy, he had a junk. He had a junkyard, and it was high. It was like 12 feet high, and you know everything. And you'd see this beautiful, beautiful countryside, and then 12 feet high of junk. He turned out to be a really sweet guy, but he was scary looking because he didn't have an eye. And then he had 2 sons who worked with him, and they were missing parts of their hands and fingers and stuff because because they were loggers, so on and off, and they'd set choker, and if you set a choker around a log, you could easily lose fingers and stuff.
My body knew why Earth was always called Mother, because what took root in her always grew.
If anybody's ever really grown anything, like if you really tilled the soil and then you planted a seed and then you grew it and it turned into like a melon or a carrot or whatever, or string beans, it's like this crazy miracle that happens. And I also, that was why I knew the earth was called Mother. And then when I became a mother, I really could relate in that kind of way to the land, you know, good land, fertile land, life-giving land. And that's why they called her Mother.
You had all kinds of people come to this place. I mean, I don't know how, well, I guess because you were coming from New York, you sort of had a sense about your security already. Like there was something in you that gave you a fearless.
I really wasn't so fearless. I was just like kind of reckless, I think.
Reckless, okay. I'm quoting here from your book. It says, "Murderers and crazies aside, only open-heartedness would keep us safe." So, were there murderers?
Yeah, yes, there was. There was one guy who came to visit who was a friend of a friend, and he had taken a lot of acid. And anyway, we were having dinner, and he jumped up on the table or climbed up, and was a big tureen of soup, and he put his foot in the soup and started like washing his foot with the bits of meat that were in the soup, and like everybody was like, oh. Plus it was really hot. He could have really hurt himself, and he had to be talked down off the table. Nobody had anything to eat after that, and we did ask him to leave, and it was hard to get somebody to leave. We had to kind of surround them and say, you're going, goodbye. And then we found out from someone who knew him that he had gone home to his home and had knifed both his parents to death. Multiple knife wounds. So, you know, he was really insane. He was really crazy, but, you know, we didn't know how crazy he was. But it's all this chemistry, and you never know what someone's chemistry is and someone's chemistry isn't.
So what would you say to a young couple now that is thinking to go live in the wilderness, maybe with a commune?
Well, there aren't so many communes. They're called intentional communities. Young couples, there's a whole resurgence of the hippie movement. The word commune has gotten like a bad rap. But there are intentional communities where people go with not much money or very little money, and they participate in the life of the group. And what you need is a willingness to do whatever is needed to be done. You need a minimal amount of clothes. It's nice if you can have a running vehicle. A lot of people don't. And I think you just have to be open-hearted and willing to work and to consider living another lifestyle entirely. I mean, I'm talking basically about people that are going to land-based commune. In land-based communes, you grow gardens, you do stuff like that, you do a lot of work, and that's what you would have to do, and see how much you like it. But you really have, you're living in close contact with people. For instance, if you wanted to go somewhere, you want to go to town and get some toothpaste. Well, you don't have a car, so you have to ask somebody, and then 8 people or 6 people also have to go to town, and you don't have very much gas, so you have to wait for all these people to come along with you to figure out where they're going to go, what they want, who they're going to talk to. You 5 of you get in the car, and it takes 8.5 hours for you to get a tube of toothpaste. So, or whatever, or diapers or something. You know, you have to consider a lot of people. You're not just considering yourself when you're living communally. And
so bring toothpaste.
Bring toothpaste. It's like being married, and I don't mean like on a sexual basis, but it's like being married to a lot of people. I mean, if you're married, you have to consider what your partner wants or doesn't want. Well, if you're living with 10 people, you have to consider what 10 people want or don't want, or you could be disliked horribly. You have to know how to be quiet.
So when you got there was nothing?
No,
there were a piece of land?
No, the second, first one I was in an old farmhouse, but the second one where we went that was in the wilderness was just a really run-down old cabin that was, floorboards had wind coming up through them, the windows were broken, it was a big mess, and there were like 12 people living in this thing. But luckily these guys could build, and so we all slept together on one level because heat rose, and fixed it up as best we could.
You were telling me there was a lot of people that were coming from the middle class. They sort of just needed an escape. Most
of the guys there were past draft age or had gotten out of the draft, but some people were still draft eligible. I think the war in Vietnam turned a lot of people against when you're dying for something you don't believe in, you go, wait a minute, hold on, something's wrong here, which is really kind of I think why those times were such, there was more protest and more anger than there is right now. So it was wild in that you had to survive on very little, and food, clothing, all that stuff, shelter, you had to provide for it. Or if you got sick, or if you needed to go to the hospital, or if you were going to have a baby, or if you were dying. But I know 1 or 2 that buried their own dead, and they also birthed their own babies. That's pretty something. The one thing, this one woman who came, she told me that she birthed her son hanging on to ropes that were connected to a tree, and underneath her was a pit, and that's how she gave birth. I thought I was going to do that. I certainly was not brave enough to do that. And when she was naked, that particular woman, she had this weird funny thing coming out of her vagina, and turned out that it just was something that got torn during birth, and I don't know. At first I thought she was a hermaphrodite, but then I realized she wasn't. And I asked her about that, and then I also asked her, this is her great line, I said, what do you do about the umbilical cord? What do you do about the umbilical cord if you're sick? She says, well, bite it off. If a chimpanzee can figure that out, why can't you? And I'm going, I just really want to encourage a love and respect of the earth and what it can do.
And you can be living in a city to do that.
You can be living in a city to do that, but it's great to get your hands in there. And it's gardening for women especially, but for anybody, has a very healing effect. And just getting in the dirt, kids don't get dirty anymore.
That brings me to another quote.
Yeah.
Due to our limited amount of running water, we had no bathtub or shower. We dirty hippies were not dirty by choice.
No, we certainly weren't. Where we were, we had a 15-foot well that was hand dug by the guy who lived in this place before we did. He was a hermit, and he dug the well. His name was Shorty. So when we first got there, he was, anyway, he dug that well.
So it was only 15 feet.
So, yeah. So, and we had a hand pump like this that pumped the water, and it was brackish when we first pumped it. It was dark. And then Clint, who was my old man, said, oh, well, maybe there's a wood rat in there or something like that. So somebody had to go down and get the wood rat out of the thing, out of the well. Then we had water, but we had a very limited supply for 12 people from a hand-dug well. Sweat bath model, where you have a lot of people in there and you pour water over hot rocks and the steam goes up and you can wash yourself like that, But it was hard to keep clean. And anyone who visited us, you could always tell who was new because they were relatively clean. They didn't have like tawny skin. It was hard. It was hard to stay clean. And you'd really know who'd been with us for a long time because they were filthy, and somebody new who just come in from the city, they were a lot cleaner. It didn't feel so great to be dirty, but you may do, and you'd use your water 1 and 2 times.
Would you guys try to go into town and try
to
find a shower?
Oh, we certainly did. There was nothing
so
like camp. Like? It was like heaven, like a hot shower.
How did you find a hot shower?
Because they had campgrounds, and you paid a quarter or 50 cents to take a hot shower, or maybe a friendly neighbor would let you use their shower, but once we used their shower, they never invited us back.